The morning my sister signed over her stake in our mother's bakery chain to settle a debt that didn't exist. I was sitting in a parking garage in downtown Columbus, eating a granola bar for breakfast, because I hadn't had time for anything else. My phone buzzed with a text from my brother-in-law that said, simply, "It's done." I didn't respond. I had been waiting 14 months for that exact message, and I already knew exactly what I was going to do next. My name is Delilah Ostrowski, and I'm 32 years old. My mother, Frances Ostrowski, spent 26 years building Bread and Bloom from a single storefront on the east side of Columbus into a regional bakery chain with 11 locations, a wholesale contract with 3 grocery distributors, and a catering division that handled everything from corporate luncheons to wedding receptions. She started it when I was 6 years old, working nights in a rented commercial kitchen, because she couldn't afford her own equipment yet. I have a memory of falling asleep on a flour sack in the corner while she piped buttercream at 2 in the morning. That memory is the reason I said yes when she asked me to come work for her after I finished my business degree at Ohio State. My older sister, Tamara, never had much interest in the business. She was always more interested in the idea of it than the reality of it. Showing up for ribbon cuttings and anniversary parties, posting photos of the display cases to her Instagram, referring to herself as co-owner at dinner parties when it suited her. The actual work, the quarterly tax filings, the vendor negotiations, the HR headaches, the 5 a.m. emergency calls when a refrigeration unit failed. That was always me and my mother. When my mother's arthritis started affecting her hands badly enough that she couldn't decorate cakes anymore, I stepped into more and more of the operational role. By the time I was 29, I was effectively running the day-to-day of all 11 locations, while my mother handled relationships and big-picture decisions. Then Tamara got married. His name was Beckett Crane, and he came with a warm smile, an impressive handshake, and a resume that he described as entrepreneurial, in a way that actually meant he had started 4 businesses that had all eventually closed. My mother loved him immediately. He was charming in that effortless way that takes real practice to develop, and he knew how to make older women feel listened to. Within 6 months of their wedding, he had convinced Tamara that he had ideas for growing Bread and Bloom, that his experience in business development was exactly what the company needed, that it would be a shame not to use his network. Family should be building something together, he told my mother over Easter dinner, and she nodded like he had said something wise. He joined the company as Director of Business Development, a title my mother invented for him, at a salary I was not consulted about. I told myself it would be fine. I told myself Tamara loved him, and Tamara had a stake in the business, and if her husband wanted to contribute, maybe he actually would. I was wrong, but it took me a long time to understand exactly how wrong. The first thing he did was bring in his brother Colin as our new regional logistics coordinator. Colin had worked in food distribution, which sounded relevant until I tried to get actual work product from him and discovered that his primary skill was talking about food distribution rather than managing it. Then came his college friend Dex, who became our marketing consultant. On retainer, billing us monthly for what appeared to be a newsletter nobody read and a social media strategy that was indistinguishable from what our previous part-time coordinator had been doing for a third of the cost. Then Beckett's cousin Joelle took over as manager at our Clintonville location, despite having no restaurant management experience, and despite the fact that we had an assistant manager there who had been with us for 4 years and was expecting to be promoted. Over the next 2 years, 9 people connected to Beckett Crane by blood, marriage, or a handshake at some point in the last decade were folded into the company across purchasing, inventory, event catering, and our central production facility. My mother approved every single one of them because Beckett always framed each hire as a personal favor he was doing for us, saving us the cost of a proper search, plugging a gap we hadn't even realized we had, connecting us with someone reliable. And because my mother trusted Tamara, and Tamara trusted Beckett, and I had not yet found the thing that would make me stop trusting all of them. The thing I found first was small. A purchase order for specialty packaging from a vendor called Ridgeline Supply Solutions that I didn't recognize. We had a packaging supplier we'd been using for 6 years, a company out of Cincinnati we had a solid contract with and good pricing on. I asked Beckett about it in passing, and he says Ridgeline had approached us with better rates, and he had switched us over as a cost-saving measure. He said it so casually, so reasonably, that I accepted it and moved on. I shouldn't have. The second thing I found was a catering invoice for an event we had apparently serviced, a corporate retreat for a real estate firm in Dublin, Ohio, that I had no record of staffing. The invoice showed full payment received, but the money had gone into an account that wasn't our main operating account. When I asked our bookkeeper, she said Beckett had set up what he described as a separate catering reserve fund to help with cash flow timing. She assumed I knew about it. I did not. I did not say anything to Tamara. I did not say anything to Beckett. I did not say anything to my mother. Instead, I started paying attention in a way I had never paid attention before. Methodically, quietly, in the early mornings before anyone else arrived at the central office and late at night after I got home. I started pulling invoices that I should have been reviewing all along, cross-referencing vendor names against state business registrations, reconciling what was coming in against what was supposed to be coming in. What I found over the following 8 months did not come all at once. It came in layers, and each layer was worse than the one before it. Ridgeline Supply Solutions was registered in Delaware to a holding company whose registered agent was a law firm that specialized in shell entity formation. The physical address was a UPS store in Westerville, 15 minutes from Beckett's house. We had been paying Ridgeline invoices for 18 months at a markup of roughly 40% over what we had paid our previous packaging vendor for equivalent products. Colin, in his role as logistics coordinator, had been approving those invoices. The catering reserve account had received 17 deposits over 23 months. Most of them were partial payments on events that had been double billed. Once to the client through our normal invoicing system, and once through a separate invoice generated from an email address that was one letter off from our official catering contact. The amounts were small enough individually that none of them had triggered any review. Together, they added up to just over $68,000. Dex, the marketing consultant we were paying $4,000 a month, had produced almost nothing verifiable. His retainer agreement, which I finally tracked down in a filing cabinet Beckett's assistant managed, included a clause stating that all marketing assets produced were the intellectual property of his firm and licensed to Bread and Bloom on an ongoing basis. Meaning, if we terminated the contract, we could theoretically lose rights to any branding work he had touched. I later learned from an actual marketing attorney that this clause was largely unenforceable, but it was clearly designed to make termination feel risky. The Clintonville location under Joelle's management had seen food cost percentage climb 9 points in 14 months. Inventory audits, which should have been weekly, had apparently been happening monthly, and the records were inconsistent. Staff turnover at that location had tripled. The assistant manager who had expected to be promoted had quit 6 months after Joelle arrived, and I had been so buried in everything else that I hadn't followed up with her the way I should have. By the time I had a clear picture, it was late October, and I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of a Panera Bread I had driven to, specifically because it was nowhere near any of our locations, and I didn't want to run into anyone I knew. I had a folder in my passenger seat and a legal pad full of notes, and my hands were very still, because I had taught them to be still when I was frightened. A trick I had learned in a public speaking class in college that had turned out to be useful for entirely different reasons than I'd anticipated. I called a forensic accountant named Mr. Beaumont, who had been recommended to me by a friend who was a CPA in the Clintonville neighborhood. I met with him for the first time at a diner in Grandview Heights on a Tuesday morning, and I told him I needed to understand the full scope of what I was looking at before I did anything else. He was methodical and quiet, and he did not seem surprised by anything I told him, which I found both reassuring and sobering. We worked together for 4 months. I paid him from my personal savings, slowly, in installments he was gracious enough to accept. I gave him access to every financial record I could pull without raising flags, and we developed a picture together that was more complete than anything I had put together on my own. The total across inflated vendor contracts, the catering reserve skimming, consulting fees for work that was not performed, and inventory losses at Clintonville that pointed strongly toward internal theft, came to approximately $312,000 over a period of roughly 2.5 years. For a chain our size, with our margins, that was not abstract money. That was money that should have gone into equipment upgrades we had delayed. That was money that should have gone into the profit-sharing arrangement my mother had promised her long-term employees. That was money my mother had spent 26 years building the right to have. I didn't tell Tamara. I want to be clear about that, and I want to be clear about why. Tamara was my sister, and I did not yet know how much she knew. I could imagine a version of events in which she had genuinely been deceived by her husband, used as an access point without her full understanding of what was happening around her. I could also imagine the version in which she knew exactly what she was walking into every morning. I did not know which version was true, and until I knew, I was not going to hand Beckett advance warning by going through the person he had the most access to. What I did instead, starting in January, was begin quietly documenting everything in a format that would be useful to a lawyer. Mr. Beaumont introduced me to an attorney, a woman named Ms. Hartwell, who practiced commercial litigation out of an office near the Short North. And we started having early morning conversations about options. There is something clarifying about sitting across from someone who will tell you plainly what your options are. She was not warm, exactly, but she was precise, and precision felt like the right thing at the time. She told me we had more than enough documentation to support civil claims. She told me the catering account activity in particular was clean enough that it could support criminal referral. She told me that my first priority, before anything else, needed to be protecting the company's assets against further loss, and that meant making my mother aware of what was happening in a way that resulted in action. Not reassurance, not let's wait and see, but action. I brought my mother the report on a Sunday morning in late February. I drove to her house in Bexley, the house I grew up in, and I sat across from her at the kitchen table where she used to let me lick the beaters when I was small, and I put the folder in front of her and walked her through every page. She did not say anything for a very long time. She asked me once to explain the ridgeline connection again, and I explained it, and she nodded slowly the way she does when she is thinking rather than agreeing. Then she asked if I was sure. I told her I was sure. I told her I had spent 4 months being sure. She cried once, briefly, looking at the Clintonville inventory numbers. Not because of the money, I think, but because she had liked Joelle. She had brought Joelle into a birthday gathering 2 Decembers ago and introduced her to the family. My mother does not make mistakes lightly, and being shown one she had made that clearly costs her something private. She called her personal attorney that afternoon. By Monday, his office had been in contact with Ms. Hartwell's office. By Wednesday, we had a meeting that included both attorneys, Mr. Beaumont's summary documentation, and a plan. The plan was not to confront Beckett or Tamara directly until we were ready to move. The plan was to secure the financial exposure, begin the process of terminating the problematic vendor contracts, and prepare for the conversation with Tamara in a way that gave her a genuine choice rather than a corner. My mother made that decision, and I think it was the right one. Because whatever Tamara knew or didn't know, she was still my mother's daughter, and my mother was not interested in treating her like a suspect until she had to. The terminations happened over the course of 10 days in March. Ridgeline's contract was canceled with cause, citing vendor agreement violations we had carefully documented. Dex's consulting retainer was terminated with proper notice and a letter from our attorney that made clear we were prepared to dispute the IP clause if challenged. Beckett received a termination letter from my mother personally, citing a restructuring of the business development function and the elimination of his position. Colin's position was eliminated the same day. Joelle was removed from the Clintonville management role. We offered her a non-management hourly position at a different location as a formality, which she declined. We notified the remaining Crane-connected employees. There were 4 others in various roles, that their positions were being eliminated in a company-wide restructuring of certain departments, which was true. Technically, we were restructuring those departments because those departments had been compromised. I was at the central production facility in Whitehall when my phone started ringing. It was Beckett. I let it go to voicemail. He called 3 more times in the next 20 minutes. Then Tamara called. I answered Tamara's call. She was not yelling. Tamara never yells. She does something quieter and sharper that I find harder to handle than yelling would be. She told me I had gone behind her back. She told me I had acted unilaterally in a company she co-owned. She told me that Beckett was devastated, that she was devastated, that I had ambushed her family, and she needed me to explain myself immediately. I told her I would explain myself at the time and place of my choosing, with our attorneys present, and that she should retain counsel if she didn't already have it. I told her the documentation was extensive and that if she wanted to understand what had been happening in the company her mother had built for 26 years, she should ask her husband to explain the Ridgeline Supply Solutions invoice history to her before we met. There was a pause on the line that lasted long enough to tell me something. The pause told me that the name Ridgeline was not entirely new to her. I did not say that. I let the pause do the work, and then I said I would be in touch through Miss Hartwell's office. She didn't call back that day. Beckett's calls stopped after he reached my voicemail 4 times. His brother Colin texted me from a number I didn't have saved, which told me someone had given it to him, a long message about how he had a family, and I needed to think about what I was doing. I did not respond. The harder week was not the week of the terminations. The harder week was the week after, when I had to be at Clintonville to support the staff who had genuinely been counting on their jobs, and were now trying to understand what had happened. When I walked in on a Wednesday afternoon, the woman who had been Joelle's longest tenured employee, a woman named Rosa who had been with us since before Joelle arrived and had clearly been struggling under her management, looked at me like I had done something that needed to be explained. I sat down with the whole Clintonville team that afternoon. I told them the truth in the broadest terms I could without opening us to additional legal exposure. I told them that management decisions had been made that did not reflect how we run the company, and that those decisions were being corrected, and that the people in this room who had shown up and done their jobs honestly had nothing to worry about. Rosa came up to me afterward. She told me she had tried to raise concerns about inventory practices 7 months ago and had been told by the regional coordinator, Colin, that she was misunderstanding the new system. I told her that I was sorry she hadn't been listened to earlier, and I meant it, and I told her that her feedback had in fact been part of what we were correcting. She seemed to need to hear that. The meetings with Tamara happened over the course of several weeks, through attorneys and then in person. The in-person conversation was the hardest thing I have done in my professional life that didn't involve yelling. Because Tamara is still my sister, and watching someone come to terms with something they did not want to know is not satisfying in the way you think it might be. She maintained for a while that she had not known the specifics. I am still not certain that's entirely true. What I am certain of is that she eventually stopped defending Beckett once Miss Hartwell laid out the documentation, piece by piece, across a conference table with fluorescent lighting that made everyone look tired. Beckett retained his own attorney, who sent a letter suggesting we had interfered with his employment relationship and violated various implied agreements. Our response, which included a 40-page exhibit of Mr. Beaumont's findings, appears to have resolved his interest in pursuing that line of argument. We did not hear from his attorney again after that. The decision to pursue criminal referral was my mother's to make, and she made it. She was clearer about it than I expected her to be. No hesitation, no let's protect the family name wavering. She told Miss Hartwell that if the documentation supported criminal referral, she wanted it made. The catering account matter was referred to the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office in May. I don't have the ability to predict outcomes, and I understand that prosecution timelines are long and uncertain, but the referral was made and it is on record, and Beckett Crane knows it is on record. Tamara filed for divorce 3 months later. She did not tell me she was going to do it. I found out when our attorney mentioned that Beckett's attorney had flagged it in relation to some asset questions that touched the company. I called Tamara that evening, and she answered, and we talked for a long time about things that had nothing to do with the business. It was the longest conversation we had had in 2 years that didn't involve any of this. And I don't know what it means for us going forward, but I know that it meant something that she picked up. The assistant manager from Clintonville who had quit rather than stay under Joelle's management. Her name was Destiny, and she had been with us since she was 23. I called her in April. I told her we had made changes at that location, and I asked if she would consider coming back as the full manager she had been waiting to become. She asked me a number of sharp questions about what had actually happened and what we were doing to prevent it from happening again, and I answered all of them honestly, and she took 2 days to think about it and then said yes. By July, Clintonville's food cost percentage had come down 6 points. It has not yet returned to where it was before Joelle arrived, but it is moving in the right direction under someone who knows what she is doing and has the authority to actually do it. The Ridgeline invoices are the subject of a separate civil action that our attorneys filed in April. I can't speak to the details of pending litigation, but I can say that the process of filing it, of sitting across from Miss Hartwell while she walked me through the complaint paragraph by paragraph, was one of the first times in this entire experience that I felt something that wasn't vigilance or grief or controlled fury. I felt for the first time in a long time like the weight of something I had been carrying without fully acknowledging had been formally recognized as a weight. That probably sounds small. It did not feel small. My mother called me on a Tuesday in August, 2 months after the civil filing, with updated numbers from our wholesale division. The new contracts we had signed after replacing the compromised vendor relationships had come in at margins we hadn't seen in 3 years. She read me the figures in her matter-of-fact way, the same voice she uses when she's telling me the weather or what she's having for dinner. And I recognized what she was doing because it is what she has always done when something difficult is quietly becoming okay. She describes the facts and lets the facts carry the feeling. She told me she wanted to formalize my role in a way she had been meaning to do for 2 years. Chief Operating Officer of Bread and Bloom, all 11 locations, all divisions. She told me she had already spoken to her attorney and the paperwork was ready when I wanted to sign it. I told her I wanted to sign it that week. I signed it on a Wednesday morning in her office, the one above the original Bread and Bloom location on the east side, with the window that looks out over the parking lot where she used to have me help unload supply deliveries when I was 9. It is not a large office. It has the same second-hand desk she bought in 1999 and has never replaced, because she says a desk that's held up that long is a desk you keep. I signed my name on 6 documents, and she opened a bottle of champagne that she had clearly been keeping in her office mini-fridge for this specific occasion, which told me she had been planning this moment for longer than she had let on, which is exactly the kind of thing my mother does. She poured 2 glasses and handed me one, and she looked at me the way parents sometimes look at their children, when they've stopped being surprised by them and started being proud of them instead. And she said simply that the company was finally in the right hands. I have thought about that moment more than I expected to. Not the title, not the paperwork, not even the champagne. I have thought about the word finally, and what it means to hear that from someone who built the thing you are now responsible for, and who is telling you that the thing she built is safe now. That is not a small thing. I did not say anything in response because there was not anything to say that would have added to it. I just held my glass and looked out the window at the parking lot and thought about the flour sacks and the 2 a.m. buttercream and how long a thing can take to become yours.